Lore of Edasia Part 1. This will be a new series that entails the history of divine credence, specifically their planet Edasia. Everything mentioned in this segment may or may not be slightly different within the main timeline of the divine credence series. However, it is a direct source of factual information if need be. The main focus of this lore episode is to describe what balancers truly are. Balancers. Balancers are the foundation of protection for Edasia. They are tasked, but are not limited to, providing security, supporting their leaders, but most importantly, opposing thieves and disobedience alike. Balancers are an important factor in the well-being of all Edasians, yet their reputation was significantly dissimilar. Balancers are a relatively new addition to Edasia, introduced during the 5th generation, year 783, and have still been in effect present day, 200 years later. The hero at the time, Nagnura, had died a year prior to their creation, yet the demon king, Karamura, had not perished. The absence of the 5th hero rolled back all the previous growth Edasia went through after a depository eruption in 699, and a following world war that lasted until 748. The council needed a more strategic structure for handling Karamura's disobedience. Normally, civilians would be rallied together and attack or defend contended interest points. Moreover, the council would take those willing to attack Karamura head on. Unfortunately, this system was flawed by the dozens of reasons. The council came together and decided on a focused military each Sarah would create that would separate the warriors within from the average Joe. The term balancer came into effect after the protocols were made because of the Sarah's consistent struggles with one another. For better understanding, the council is a supportive group, one representative from each Sarah that guide Edasia. They are not a government, nor do they claim to be, but guide and maintain a supportive authoritative force over Edasia. Lifespan was around 90 years of age back then, meaning that although the first council was formed in 746, more than half of the original cast was present in 783 for the introduction of balancers. It was no doubt that everyone believed conflict was a natural side effect of so many individuals being able to use magic, and with the sex differences becoming more obsolete as magic evolved, the balancer population would fill up to the thousands in the first week of initiations, though a sinister scandal of those only stirring for honor would make tranquility harder to achieve. Upon the initiation process, balancers received dermals, magical armor, each given a number identification that was also engraved in the front and the rear of their chestplate. For example, Macadamia's IDs were numbers 300 through 399, 999. 300 for a balancer would be announced as 300, 310 as 310, 355, 399, 200, 399, 34, and so on. Balancer identification acquirement was much more lenient back in the day. The majority of Sarahs would allow foreigners to become balancers. Only 32 elements had been discovered, and the highest stage was thought to be stage 1. In addition, their efficiency calculations were also skewed by the available technology. The scale scientists made involved the spectrum of colors. Violet meant a low efficiency, green for mid efficiencies, and red for high efficiencies. What they believed was complete or 100% efficient was truly 49, give or take. It is important to note that Anyoi had not been discovered until 799, so no one could measure another's efficiencies without documents. A side note, individuals' efficiencies could be high in reality, some significantly higher than the one documented. This has been a prevalent observation from centuries before. In context of what they had at the time, Council sought out those with stage 2 on at least 10 elements with efficiencies of at least 75. Ages 20 through 30 were prioritized. Balancers did not have mandatory training, and those who did so was solely for personal gain. The dermals they were given were also world class. Even if their magic abilities were worse, disobedience and other foes would constantly being outdamaged. Monetary compensation gave balancers a slightly more luxurious life than the average civilian job. The pay rates and fame of being a balancer also enhanced many of their egos. As a balancer during late 783 and early 785, it was common to be sent out on a life-threatening mission on the first day. There were also 70 Saras, unlike the 16 in present times. The tectonic plates were different, and so was the ecumeny. This led to Saras with higher populations having problems with scarce resources. Mind you, forces of 300 balancers would be raining down on enemy hideouts. Nutrition intake also plays a role in efficiency growth. The best case scenario for these missions predicted the return of 3/4 of the initial balancers sent. Population problems began to inflict heavy societal issues, and councils could not afford to merely waste and replace balancers 786 onward. However, the first sprees of balancers being fired set in. Demon King Karamua was killed in year 784 by balancers during one of his purges. It was confirmed in 788 that all the remaining disciplines, including those fled without their powers, had either been killed or captured. Many Saras rejoiced that finally their long struggle had come to pass. Tragically, the equal half of Saras still had restless stress and agony, a glowing hatred for certain others. In late 789, the strongest of the balancers from these Saras formed illegal guilds to continue conquering other territories. Surprisingly, those with bitter intentions were still at large, growing these guilds at insane rates. Although Sara on Sara invasions were never banned by the council, warfare was closely monitored and on a few occasions were indirectly stopped by them. Some councils held fights between their balancers for takeover. Others had clear intentions of attacking other councils and killing them head on. This period in Edasia's history was titled the Decade of Slumber, as between 790 through 800, another mist of wars happened. However, unlike the previous fights Edasia has experienced, targets were carefully chosen. Every Sara participated actively in some shape or form, accompanied by balancers leading these onslaughts. On a handful of occasions, even civilians had been leading over a guild. Those who held guilds soon grew more numbers, and their civil strength rivaled that of councils, some even surpassing the council's esteem or ruthlessness. By year 795, all the councils knew about these balancer authorities, but no one dared to question to lose the shallow loyalty of those they had been commanding to conquer and kill. The raids began to cease in year 798. Many Saras had fallen and new ones had grown, commanded uncounseled by a few lead balancers. Unlike the cancelled Saras having around 200 balancers at average, these balancer-controlled Saras would have up to 500 fellow balancers under their aid. Towards the end of the Decade of Slumber, many of these influencers were assassinated or killed due to greed, and the remaining forming truce with the council. During these assassinations, a strike was pursued by the loyal balancers that had pledged to the council. They requested that they should be paid more as there being a lack among them. Balancers' overall pay had been rising steadily, but some Saras went from 600 balancers to 200, and the stress was ever present. Cleverly, the council released an enactment in early 799 that allowed balancers to work civilian jobs. This proved to be successful. A balancer's pay was just 5% higher than an average civilian. To get this standard pay, a balancer did not have to do anything but just obtain the title and show up to meetings. Where the money came from were acts of filling the usual quota or role of being in a fight, stopping illegal activities, creating well thought out plans, introducing new concepts, and having a positive reputation. The top 25% of balancers will be making 10 to 20 times the amount an average civilian would make. The catch was, of these top paid balancers, only a third of them would survive engagements. There was no correlation between age, personality, gender, etc. It was just a very unpredictable affair. Giving balancers the access of working civilian jobs gave them more motives for cooperation and activeness in their role as a balancer countlessly. Year 801, the first title of general had been branded by a few councils during a visit to a balancer Sera, Furor Nadale. Unlike the councils, Nadale was more connected with his civilians emotionally, mentally, and physically. The council realized that a gateway between them and the civilians of their seras would be more manageable than running everything themselves. In 815, a trial test was created based on morals, logical thinking, and cooperation. This test was a push for the need of a new class of balancers titled generals, who would directly control the sera, give orders, help maintain, and assist the sera in which and every way possible. As technology advanced, so did the requirements for a balance requirement. Aced elements had still not been discovered, but alchemists created a machine that allowed a perception of efficiencies. There were 100 now being present day 64, and the total elements being at 34. The new magical requirements for balancers had now become 15 stage 1 elements at 80 efficiency. A month-by-month training regimen was also created for balancers. Continuing, the test had standards for which the average ranking was 135 out of 200. Only balancers above the age of 23 could take this test to become a general. However, the test was somewhat unsuccessful as balancers within the same sera argued, campaigned, or sabotaged nearly everyone who participated in the trial. After further adjustments, the council created fairer methods for scaling. Such changes introduced in year 818 were civilian voting, minimal age of 25, and the disclosure that generals were only applicable to the nation born in. During the next 3 years, the council would host ballots for each sera as availability opened. Even those who were uncounseled were passively forced to attend. The council wanted to wait until all seras had choices of passion and began to teach the balancers who won their balance everything they needed to know about running a sera. This tour of discussion lasted between 820 through 822, with multiple balancers dropping out due to stress or the job just not being the career they had in mind. The first command of generals was finalized in year 824, ultimately introducing a tier above balancers. Although balancers now received their assignments from generals, the two ranks were seen to be equal until the 830s, where numerous generals began to make public announcements about their status and what their presence meant to balancers in all. To add on, the positioning of balancers' physical ID numbers were now fixed over their shoulders around the 820s, and all seras had moved to this style in the late 840s. In addition, balancers now receive their dermals after becoming a balancer rather than when they started the initiation process. In spite of the fact that balancers now move from their commander's words, many of them refuse to realize that certain responsibilities were no longer in their grasp. This caused a few balancers to action clearances generals should only have. During the latter debriefings of duties is the only time the council outright said no invading other seras. Of course, there was loopholes to this, but sera fights decreased from fear and respect towards the council. Balancers became more inert and only moved when given orders. One big change to the balancer department was the introduction of council balancers that was silently added during the midst of peace, specifically in year 842. It was an optional class to the most valiant balancers or generals who sought to help the council on a personal basis. The council did not want to interfere with the established connections generals retained via the public of their nation, so the perfect solution for the council to fulfill the task without self-exposure were council balancers. Council balancers had elevated authority in specific scenarios, but nonetheless the same responsibilities as a balancer based for the council and limited to 100 warriors. The minimal age at the time was 28 and at least 5 elements at 90% efficiency. In year 844, the total amount of seras had decreased to 30 and stricter laws had been set per sera, with most being by generals. The council made a statement about the omission of any enactments that prohibited the invasion of their seras. Their crucial change to limit the balancer threshold per sera to 150 active or passive left many in awe. Throughout the years, they would lower balancers to 100 by year 858. Macadamia would only have the numbers 300 through 399 as an example. The main objective was to suppress military development. The main issue was that geographical locations offered a disproportionate amount and quality of resources. There was also a clear difference in training styles that worsened the fact that so many individuals wanted to become balancers in certain parts of Edasia while others didn't. 5 Sarahs could not manage to get 100 balancers even though 2 of them had the highest number of inhabitants. Battles came and gone, but nothing ever led to anything massive due to growing technology and the bit of peace that was left. By year 870, 40 liliments were now in action, and Sarahs began to adopt their own requirements of X amount of liliments to become a balancer. Age was minimalized to 19. Their 100% efficiency was now reaching to 81 in tests, but personal unyours were reaching to the high 90s. The tests and training for balancers had taken a complete overhaul, and now more civilian jobs had further separated balancers from being local soldiers. Sarahs also began to only allow nation-born individuals to become balancers, like generals. Edasia was becoming more content with how daily life was supposed to go. Civilians would do civilian jobs, local officials would handle small crimes, and balancers would deal with threats that hindered mass civilians. And, occasionally attack other Sarahs for those generals who still had a hunger for blood. The mindset of balancers was more centralized on the protection of their people and supplying their generals' wishes. Generals never forced balancers against their moral code of harming other innocent civilians, yet most balancers will cope with just disabling anyone in their path. Until year 954, when the demon of the 6th generation, Lark Karosi, was brought upon their world, balancers only went through minor changes. Alchemists reached the true 100% efficiency in 901. All dermals had to be the same model per Sarah after 902. For example, all macadamian balancer dermals had to look the same, and all the custopian balancer dermals had to look the same. Balancers who retired and could still fight were no longer being classed as a passive balancer, and if a Sarah did not have their maximum number of balancers, a balancer who retired could renew relatively easily after mid-905. After 908, the helmet could finally be removed without requiring an entirely new balancer dermal. Funny enough, every section of the balancer dermal could be reattached except the helmet due to the material used for it. After 920, a new enactment posed that Sarahs who are farthest or least acceptable to threats will share the 10-0X series of balancers. In year 931, another enactment was created allowing a new class of civilians called medallions who assisted local authorities with terrorists or wars. These individuals lifted huge stress off balancers and helped those who wanted to do these tasks without becoming a balancer. Medallions could not pursue, but only defend. This caused most exploitive generals to subdue others' intentions by making their visual army seem massively larger in attacking or defending scenarios. Lastly, in 954, exquisimists were created to specifically fight discipients. This relieved weight from those who only wanted to fight discipients exclusively and not take on the accountability of becoming a balancer. An intentional flaw was that a balancer cannot be an exquisimus alongside being a balancer. Not that they couldn't fight recipients, but to not have them get paid for exquisimus work. On the other hand, one could become an exquisimus and then a balancer. It was a fine way to maintain warriors from egalitarians. Near the start of Count Akima's life as a 6th generation hero in 959 and onwards, balancers had obtained a more threatening respect. This lingering feeling had been noticed by higher authorities since the late 800s, but was never so prevalent as now. Technology had achieved many new spikes, causing many balancers to become vastly superior to the average civilian. Only accounting for the active use of liliments, in 950, the average balancer had 27 liliments and 82 efficiency. On the other hand, civilians had 15 liliments and 44 efficiency. This is vastly different when crossed side by side to 50 years prior in 900, where balancers had 17 to civilians 10 and 61 to civilians 39. Not to mention that after 940, when the first assists were being introduced, balancers now gained a liliment boost whenever their dermals were used, and their auras mimicked each other as well. Balancers had and still have access to equipment that would release their potential faster than any civilian training could. However, at the end of the day, balancers were always seen as these idols of justice and hope whenever they arrived on the scene during distress. The island of Insullander, which presently holds Watashimono do Shigo, Matun Caste, and Stakagnid, went through a massive recolonization in 823. Unlike the rest of Edasia, there had been a constant conflict with the people who live in Insullander, a conflict that had been lasting since year 421, even before the Dispositor eruption. Watashimono, which was named Watashimu until 946, was the northern part of the island and made up 70% of the island's explored mass. Mantu Kas was the southwest of Watashimu, and the remainder of the island was uninhabited. These two seras only accounted for 64% of Insulander's potential territory. Due to their geographical location away from the major islands and the wars thereof, they were never able to adapt the balancer general dynamic. A council was present as it had become a necessary part of the economy, but their hierarchy remained traditional. And by traditional, traditionally different depending on the prime ruler one resides. Some notate by rankings of peasants, clergy, nobles, and kings, while others delegate certain society tasks to a single individual. For comparison, a balancer may be assigned to roam the streets of their sera for direct contact, assistance, and security. However, if they understand other foundations of systems, they can moderately switch to a military leader or a resource manager if need be. In Insulander, one individual was taught only how to farm. That's it. This causes a huge number of authoritative figures, which leaves civilians to exist in a near absolute controlled environment than the main general ruled islands. Even so, the system has proved to be beneficial in some ways more than others, and as of recently have the people of Insulander ponder on adopting the modern system. Although this historic lesson does not justify the true metamorphosis of their idealization, the evolution of what the title balancer means has shifted greatly between their introduction in 783 and the present days of 983. Balancers are selfless individuals who seek to maintain peace within their sera while aiming to please their generals. In one sentence, you could say, a balancer brings justice to all those who dare break the peace, laws, and they carry out the work of their generals.